Today we're going to be talking about 3 topics that I'm sure you'll hear a lot about while at Manifest: data, supplier engagement, and industry resources that support greenhouse gas emission reductions. All right. So throughout the next 30 minutes, we're going to be talking about how organizations can work together to bring the reality of those 3 topics into an impactful force. My name is Meg Campbell. I am the Data Management and Impact Lead for Supplier LOCT, which is a program that supports a collaborative of brands to reduce emissions in their supply chains and work with their suppliers. I'm joined today by a wonderful group of panelists connected by brands that I'm sure you know very well. Catherine is the Director of Procurement for the Coca-Cola Company. Sanjay is the Senior Vice President of the American Frozen Food Institute. And Michael is the Head of Partnerships at HowGood, which is a platform that helps businesses gather data to make sustainable supply chain choices. The topic of our discussion today is going to revolve around the food and beverage industry, but the topics, challenges, and solutions that we discuss are transferable to any sector. Similar to many supply chains, the food and beverage supply chain is very complex. As really a global economic driver, it contributes a lot to greenhouse gas emissions, and the goal is to reduce those. In order to do that, corporations need data. They need information to really inform how they're going to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions. But it's extremely challenging to actually gather that data. So, Catherine, how can organizations gather data within their supply chain? Where should they start?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the food and beverage industry is really vast. So it touches everything from agriculture and packaging to distribution to retail. And so I think one of the really big things that's really important is essentially to figure out where your focus should be. So understand your emissions and then really deep dive into where are your biggest contributors and focus on that. So at Coca-Cola, we have calculated our scope 1 and our scope 2 and our scope 3. And like you can see on the slide, we're pretty close to that. We know that about 90% of our emissions sit in our supply chain. And so, but still scope 3 is really broad, right? So, okay, we can focus on scope 3, but scope 3 is also really big. But we know that within scope 3, the products that we buy are a really big part of that. We know within the products, packaging is a really important contributor. We know within packaging, glass and plastic and metal is a really big piece of it. And so being able to sort of take that broad lens, but then really narrow it down is really helpful, because for us, then we know, okay, let's go partner with those suppliers in those spaces. Let's figure out how we can decarbonize that piece of the supply chain and work together to do it.
Sanjay, I saw you agreeing with a lot of that and shaking your head. What are some of the challenges you face with collecting data?
I represent a trade association, which means my members are processors, companies in the logistics and distribution chain, retailers, and perhaps even consumers from the standpoint of the food spectrum. And what's important, I think, from my perspective, is the general industry view. And when you think about data relative to GHG emissions, scopes 1, 2, and 3 is one approach. And I can tell you, scope 3 has 2 extremes. There's the ag sector, which is very, very upstream. That's a huge contributor to the food sort of footprint. And then downstream, consumer behaviors can impact the potential carbon footprint of a product. Having said that, our processors, and even relative to the distribution chain, I would probably say scopes 1 and 2 are the most relevant right now. And that's really important for everyone really to understand, because the industry has also a demographic. There's the large multinational global companies that are probably quite mature in their journeys of addressing GHG protocols, but there's also small and really generational family-owned companies. So the awareness, the knowledge, the ability to implement, all of these there's a spectrum of adoption. And we as an association are recognizing that. We signed up with Supplier LOCT to provide that education and training as one step for some of those companies, but also supporting through a share group some of the great work that some of the large multinationals have done for the industry.
Yeah, I think you guys talked, about a lot of things there, starting at a broad sense and then thinking about who your suppliers are, who your processors are. And really what I was hearing is it starts with identifying suppliers who have large climate impact, right? Teaching those suppliers how to actually reduce their emissions and help them through that process. And then the third is working with them to monitor their progress and actually have them report that progress back to you so you can understand how are they progressing, what is their sustainability journey like, and are they also helping to achieve sustainability goals that you all have set. Those are extremely important aspects. And I know those 3 steps, they sound easy, right? We wish it was just 3 easy steps. But it's actually really challenging. And at Supplier LOCT, we've identified, and Sanjay, you mentioned this, that it's really challenging because suppliers are at very different stages in their climate journey. And we have to account for that. And part of that is providing them with the right resources so that they can succeed. It's helping them with that educational aspect along the way. And Michael, that's really where HowGood is one of those great resources. So I know at Supplier LOCT, we're very happy to partner with HowGood to provide that resource to suppliers and help them actually calculate the greenhouse gas emissions of ingredients of a product and help them get this information and be able to report it back to the companies that they're working with. So tell us, what is HowGood and how does it work?
Yeah, Meg. So think of HowGood as this vast library of emissions factors for all food ingredients on the planet. So whether it's an avocado grown in California or a tomato grown in Canada or cacao from West Africa, we have the entire food system mapped. And so our objective is to help food companies calculate their Scope 3 emissions, because that's where a bulk of the emissions live, and do so in as accurate way as possible. And we do this by building product carbon footprints from the ground up. So ingredient by ingredient, right? Having all of those ingredients mapped and kind of building up to a product carbon footprint. I think the cool thing for us is we can do that with very little supplier data. But as most people in this room can imagine, the more we understand from upstream in the supply chain, the more that's going to inform more accurate emissions when it comes to calculation time. And so that's why we're excited about partnering with Guidehouse and Supplier LOCT. It's this seamless transfer of information between brand and supplier, and it's really a great opportunity for us to get that primary data, use it to enhance product carbon footprint, and we're reaching a level of product carbon footprint, and Scope 3 accuracy that we've never seen before. And, it's not just 1 or 2 product carbon footprints. This is hundreds and thousands. We're really reaching scale with this program. So it's super exciting stuff. And I think we're going to take a look at the platform itself now and see what a user sees, both from the brand side and also from the supplier side and kind of that interaction point. So let's take a look. All right, since we can't hear volume, I'm going to try to narrate this as best as we can. And so this is the Lattice platform, the HowGood platform, where we have all of these emissions factors and other sustainability metrics. What we're essentially doing here from the brand side is understanding our corporate level footprint and now kind of digging into the individual formulas that make up the product carbon footprints that live in our portfolio. You can see here kind of toggling through some of the different types of metrics, carbon metrics and blue water usage and other sustainability metrics. When you click into one of these materials, you'll then get to see the breakdown of those ingredients. Within those breakdowns, you see carbon emissions, and you see that in the yellow column, land use change, processing, blue water usage, land occupation, we're scrolling to the right, soil health, biodiversity, labor risk. So with each ingredient, we have a set of metrics, right, tied to that ingredient and tied to the sourcing location of that ingredient. When you click over to the vendor side, this is where you can begin to break things down, not only by the material, but by the vendor that's providing it. And this is where you can ask a vendor, hey, this is how we've described your material in the platform. Can you validate that? Do you want to provide more inputs? Do you want to build your own product carbon footprint and publish that to us so that we can use a more accurate version of this material in our own product carbon footprinting? And that's what you see happening here with the request vendor data submission form. All right, now we're pivoting over to what the supplier is going to see. So now they've got their list of products here, and they can begin to kind of build their own product carbon footprint with not only, again, the material that they're building, the subcomponents, right? So if it's made of corn syrup and starch and sugar and water, they can build that piece by piece in the platform and make sure that it's representative of how they build their product, how they source their ingredients, any certifications tied to those ingredients. And then once that it's as accurate as possible of a representation, they can submit that data and that product carbon footprint back to the brand. And now the brand sees a new sugarcane in their platform from Acme Supplier that's been submitted, and they can incorporate that into their product. So it's this seamless transfer of information from the supplier to the brand in a way where we're just getting this level of granularity and accuracy that a brand doesn't have all by themselves. And so you kind of see that workflow happening here in real time. And sorry, we don't have the sound. There was a nice narration to this demo, but I'm doing my best to replicate it. And then you can see here, share the footprint, and now we've got the product carbon footprint built, and we're sharing it directly with our customer, and now that footprint lives with the brand, and they can represent that in their own formulation. And I think we'll probably pivot back here to the brand view, if I remember correctly. Yep, now we've got the crispy cracker formulation, and we're taking a look at the different stages of the carbon life cycle. You can see cradle to farm gate represented in that yellow tab. In the green tab, some of the kind of downstream transportation to processing, and then packaging further to the right. So you can see some of the different stages of the carbon life cycle here. And then if we scroll down, I think we'll probably scroll down here in a second. Oh, that's it. All right.
Great job.
Yeah, thank you for that
Well done,
narration, Michael. Since the sound isn't working, we appreciate you all bearing with us. But it's a really great tool to put all of this information right at the fingertips of suppliers to help them gather this information, develop a product carbon footprint, and really be able to see where can I make improvements in the supply chain to reduce my emissions. And that's really what they're looking for. They need some of this data to make those informative decisions. And so, Michael, building this out and working with Supplier LOCT, what are the secret ingredients to engaging suppliers and providing them with the right resources? Yeah, Meg. So Supplier LOCT is the perfect format for this, right? Brands and suppliers engaging. You guys have that nailed. And when we started talking about a partnership and introducing our platform to it, I think we wanted to nail these three things before building a program and taking it to suppliers. I'm going to work backwards here from right to left, but scalability, you saw some of it in the demo, narrated by me. It was much better by the original narrator, but what you did see there, hopefully, was all of the different emissions factors and metrics
that already live in the platform. So if a supplier logs in, they can build their formula as closely as it is represented with their both ingredients and inclusion percentage, and they can see that in real time, right? And that's a good starting point. I think that lends itself to the flexibility side. If you have supplier A, let's say, that knows a ton about their subcomponents, where ingredients are sourced, which ones are organic, even agricultural practices like irrigation tied to the sugar that they source, that's great, right? We can incorporate that. But then supplier B may know nothing about their ingredients, right? And that's okay too. And maybe supplier C knows a lot about one ingredient, but nothing about the other four, right? We can work with any of those scenarios. And so to be able to ingest that and harmonize that and build product carbon footprints with a lot of information or some information or no information, I think that's the flexibility theme that we wanted to nail. Obviously, ease of use. You are not going to get participation from suppliers if it's not easy to use. And you saw some of that in the demo, very user-friendly, but also suppliers are getting takeaways. They're getting insights as they're building. They're seeing, wow, at the ingredient level, these are my problem ingredients. Or maybe if I tweak this, I can bring my product carbon footprint down from 3.2 kilograms to 2.8, right? Like little insights like that in a matter of 5, 6, 7 minutes of building something in platform, that means a lot, and that gets the suppliers to engage in a higher percentage. And that's what we've been seeing in some of our tests, and now we're kind of rolling that out to suppliers en masse. But it was key to nail those 3 themes before we got there.
Yeah, those are great points. And Sanjay, for you, how does a resource like HowGood and Supplier LOCT help you and help the organizations you work with to collect information?
Yeah, I'm going to take the trade association perspective again, right? The idea is really to use an approach that helps you monitor carbon emissions and identify hotspots. So from a trade association perspective, we're looking for common hotspots that might result in a collective goal. And one intuitive idea that the industry's had, and I think Jason, who's in the audience here, introduced us to this concept, is, well, what happens if the entire cold chain raises the standard set point of temperature storage from this 0 degrees Fahrenheit to something warmer? What are the carbon emission implications of that? And indeed, there's lots of risk in doing that from a quality and a safety standpoint, but that's the kind of work that's really helpful. The other, now that's very much sort of scope 1, 2, and 3. That's very much part of the GHG approach. But if you look at a product carbon footprint, I referenced consumers as I started earlier. Think about it. Frozen foods have an extended shelf life. We reduce much lower levels of frozen food. So is there a carbon offset? Are there net benefits from consumption of frozen foods? And that's the kind of data that you could generate out of a product carbon footprint if you went from cradle to grave, which is end of life. And hopefully that allows consumers and in the society in general to make better decisions about their food choices. So this is one of the reasons why AFI, my institute, as well as our processors, have really doubled down on participating with Supplier LOCT and the HowGood group, and I'm really excited to find out what our product carbon footprints are going to look like.
Yeah, thank you. And Catherine, from your perspective, how does product carbon footprinting help Coca-Cola as well?
Yeah, so kind of like we mentioned, creating a product carbon footprint for our own products is really important. So what is the product carbon footprint of a can of Coca-Cola? But also, like Michael was talking about, for us to really be able to know what the emissions are for our can of Coke, we need to know what our suppliers' emissions are. So what is the emissions for the metal that we're buying to make that can, right? So it sort of plays both ways, both into it's important for us to be able to calculate our own product carbon footprints, but also to be able to collect them from our suppliers so that we understand our own product carbon footprints even better.
Yeah, thanks. And you guys both touched on a few great points there. It's about the whole cradle to grave, the life cycle of a product that you have to consider in these footprints. And there are so many inputs alone into each of those aspects. So Michael, I know we just saw a quick preview of the HowGood platform, but I know there's so many more inputs that go into it. You know, what else can a supplier input to really make a more robust product carbon footprint?
Yeah, Megan, I'm glad you called it out, Catherine, because your definition of a product carbon footprint is different than your suppliers, right? You're looking at a can of Coke. They are looking at their product carbon footprint is the corn syrup that goes into your can of Coke. And so you might be tracking down hundreds, if not thousands, of PCFs from different suppliers. And so I think this cradle to grave visual does a really good job of breaking down the different stages of the life cycle. Obviously, the raw material level, what's happening at the agricultural stage is super important. There's a lot of nuances to what's happening on the farm. It's going to usually make up a bulk of the product carbon footprint, but there are other stages that need to be considered. And when it comes to, are there renewables involved in the manufacturing and processing of the food product? What are some of the transportation nodes or distances, right, to get, let's say, an avocado from Chile to California to Missouri? You've got over the ocean, you've got truckload. And so contemplating that distance and the emissions factors tied to those modes, I think is super important. Obviously, there's packaging, right? What is the cardboard? What is the plastic involved in moving these goods around the globe? So there's, I think, a lot of nuance to each of those stages, and it's important to measure each so that you can optimize the way that you produce your products or the way that you package them or the way that you transport them to market. And each one of those tweaks in each one of those stages can mean a lot to the total product carbon footprint.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. You're so right in that any sort of small change can actually make a big impact. And it's looking at all of those levers to see, okay, if we change something here, how does that impact the footprint? Where does that bring down our emissions in the supply chain? So I know we've talked about some of that, and I'm curious, Catherine, if you would be able to share an example from Coca-Cola's perspective on how you've been able to identify these hotspot regions, right, and engage suppliers to actually realize emission reductions.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually an example from one of our sustainability reports a couple of years ago. It's called the plant bottle. So essentially, like you saw on the HowGood platform, being able to see, my product, my plastic bottle of Coca-Cola, and the breakdown of how much each piece of that product contributes to the total emissions, right? So how much emissions are coming from the cap? How much is coming from the sugar that goes into it? How much is coming from the plastic that makes up that bottle? And so when we did that sort of calculation, we saw, okay, a huge percent of our emissions of this plastic bottle is coming from the virgin plastic that we use, which probably makes sense, but it's still good to know in the data, right? And so there are a lot of ways, you can increase your recycled content to reduce the amount of virgin plastic. So use all those other Coca-Cola bottles that we produce to make a new Coca-Cola bottle. And that is a really important part of our sustainability program. But this one specifically was a really interesting and innovative way to do that. So essentially, we partnered with our suppliers, and we recognized that there is a waste product. It's called biomass, and it's a waste product that is produced from a lot of agricultural practices, including sugarcane processing. And through the partnership with our suppliers, we realized, okay, well, we can actually use this biomass and turn it into something that we can then substitute for that virgin plastic in that bottle, and we can reduce the emissions by 30% for that plastic bottle. And so I think this example really highlights the two things that we've been drilling into your head for the last 30 minutes are the data is really important, right? For us, we needed to be able to break that down, what our product carbon footprint looks like by each piece to know, okay, we really need to focus on the virgin plastic and reducing that because it's going to have the biggest impact. And then that second piece is the collaboration. Coca-Cola couldn't have done that by themselves, right? We worked with our suppliers downstream, so our sugarcane suppliers, our plastic suppliers, but we also worked upstream. We had to make sure that, once we put that plant material into our bottle, it wasn't going to do something in the recycling stream that we didn't anticipate, right? So it really is about looking at that entire life cycle of the product, understanding it, and driving impact.
Yeah, the point about teamwork and how it's everyone working together, exploring these potential solutions and actually seeing them come to fruition and seeing the results on how you can make a more sustainable product and how it's a win-win for the supply chain too, and the environment, and even the bottom line, I'm sure too.
Absolutely.
Great. I know we're kind of nearing the end, and may save some time for questions at the end. So I want to pose you all with a final question for the audience as well. What is one key action everyone in the audience could do to set their supply chain up for success and really optimize it for emission reductions?
Yeah, I can start. I think, given that this is a supply chain conference with such a transportation focus, I'd love to focus on that leg of what we just looked at within the, the different stages of the product carbon footprint. And, how is that being measured today internally? And it's more curiosity from my standpoint. There's a lot of different ways to get products from farm to manufacturing to distribution to retail, and how are those emissions factors being measured? Is it at a kind of mode average basis? Is it a global average? Are there really specific emissions factors that are being provided by transportation vendors? I really am more curious and don't know the answers to these, but I would love to understand, and maybe it's very nuanced by mode, but that would be, I think, almost a question I would pose now, or a thing to dig into as you go back and kind of try to understand how is that being measured from kind of top of the chain over the ocean to truck and rail and all of the different modes. So yeah, that would be my question I'd pose to the audience.
Yeah, I can go next. Mine is a little bit higher level. I would say one of my favorite things about working in sustainability is the collaboration. So my advice would be talk to your suppliers because they are the experts in their area. So if you can share with them what your goals are that you want to decarbonize, work with them. They're going to figure out how to innovate that space. And then also work with your peer companies. Some of my favorite conversations, the places that I've learned the most in an hour on Zoom, is talking with other brands who are doing the same thing that we're doing, but they're a little bit ahead of us or a little bit behind us, right? That collaboration is really, really great, and it fosters a lot of innovation. So that would be my advice.
If it's not amply clear, there's no silver bullet, right? So I'm going to give a couple. I think the first is, I think there's efficiencies to be had from little solutions. And we've got to go after that by the accumulation of data, which is hopefully one of the takeaways you guys can have today. The other is around just for the logistics folks. As we're probing this concept of moving the frozen storage temperature to a higher set point, what's becoming somewhat clear is also that the discipline of the cold chain may also be addressed. Do you have large fluctuations in the cold chain temperature discipline? Can we address those before we try to move towards a new set point? So that's, and then lastly, I'll end with this. If you're making choices about your foods, a sustainable food is a frozen food, for sure. For the simple fact that it will preserve the nutritional potential of that food simply by staying in the freezer. So, more frozen foods.
Thanks for sharing those sentiments, you guys. Definitely great thoughts about teamwork and collaboration, thinking about the product that you're selling and all the sustainability aspects that go along with that, whether it's packaging product, if it's frozen or not, and the transportation behind it. We have a lot of logistics people in here, and it's not just a sustainability team that's helping to make these changes, it's everyone in an organization. And I think that's a key part of what you all said too, is it takes teamwork. So as we do start to wrap up, really, I know the audience, I'm sure you guys have a lot to digest. We went through a lot, including that demo. So yeah, I know that's a lot to take in and digest, no pun intended, with us really focusing on the food and beverage industry here. But I think the key takeaway is that really fostering collaboration between brands, suppliers, and partner organizations like Supplier LOCT and HowGood can really help streamline the data gathering process and also set a supply chain up for emission reductions, which is extremely important to realize those change and see that as many stakeholders demand it. So yeah, we thank you all for listening to this session and are excited to take any of your questions.
Hey guys, my name's Antonio, CEO of Procuro. I think my question's for you, Catherine. So you talked a lot about partnerships, working with your vendors, because I mean they'll know more, they'll know they're the experts in the field. We'd love to know how the Coca-Cola company is just kind of structuring those partnerships. If there's any, more tactical, like contractual things that you guys are doing to be able to have suppliers think long term, because sometimes it's difficult to get them to think longer term than the immediate.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are part of Supplier LOCT, which is a big part of it. So essentially, there's how many brands in it now? 29 brands in it. And basically, we all get to invite our suppliers. So they can learn everything from how to build their footprint to what are the abatement levers that they can pull, how do they start disclosing to things like the CDP and the different regulations. So Supplier LOCT is a huge piece of our partnership. We also just launched a beverage renewable energy partnership called Refresh Alliance. So it was co-founded by ourselves, Heineken and Diageo. And it's really just to be able to increase renewable energy within the food and beverage space. And then we also work with our suppliers a lot to make sure that they have science-based targets, that they're working to decarbonize. And a lot of that really kind of ends up at the procurement team level, right? So working within the category. But yeah, those are a couple of ways that we do it.
And I can jump in and take Nick's question here with the 15 seconds we have left. How can one achieve the step one of identification while working with mid-tier traditional suppliers who don't have much data availability? And I will say, and kind of back to my original introduction of HowGood, this is most suppliers. And so all we really need is a product name. And we can start there. We can kind of back into the subcomponents with our algorithms and the import-export data of how this product is built, what are the ingredients, where are they from, and build a product carbon footprint. And then one by one, as more supplier data becomes available, and it might take 1 year, it might take 5 years, we can enhance that product carbon footprint over time. But I think that's a key question because not every supplier has much data availability.
Yeah, great point. Awesome. And I think that's where Supplier LOCT and other organizations can come into play too. There's those types of organizations and collaboratives available to help you identify which of my suppliers are at high climate impact and low climate maturity, where can they make the most progress, and what's an organization that can help me teach them, right? That we want to take the pressure off of you all and some of these major businesses to help you reach your sustainability goals. So we're at time, but thank you again, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.